It might actually work. They sat across the desk from the counselor. She had fluffy white hair and soft hands that lay calmly intertwined on the desk in front of her. But her sari was crisp and her eyes looked steadily out at them. "You've heard Meena's side of the case," she said to Jatin. "You fell in love, got married, were happy. There were occasional squabbles, but as she said, those are normal. Then something went horribly wrong. You flew off the handle easily, became deeply distrustful, and there was a breakdown of the relationship. And you have refused to explain the reason for this change. This is her version. Now I want to hear your side of the story." Jatin was dismissive. "This is a complete waste of time and money. Our marriage is finished. I can't trust her, and I have to watch her every minute of the day. I cannot live like this. She's not the person I thought she was. I've been a fool, but I cannot carry on being one. Divorce is the only answer." Meena simply couldn't think what had made her kind and loving Jatin change so much. She racked her brain. What cause had she given him? He evidently blamed her. She couldn't find any answer, and he wouldn't say. It had taken her weeks of arguing to even bring him to Mrs. Shah. "Divorce is one answer, yes," Mrs. Shah agreed calmly. "But it's certainly not the only answer. A marriage is worth fighting for. I'd like to hear your story about your 5 months of marriage and how a man who so recently loved a woman can now distrust her so much that he spies on her phone to know her whereabouts. What caused you to feel so differently about Meena? Tell me." Jatin swallowed, his Adam's apple straining as if it was a huge chunk that he could hardly push down his gullet. Mrs. Shah kept her eyes steadily on him. He squirmed. Meena started to say something, but Mrs. Shah silenced her with a raised finger. It was Jatin's turn. They would wait till he was ready. Finally, Jatin burst out. "I don't wish to say. It's a very ugly business. She is still my wife. I cannot say these things about her to a stranger. I have not enunciated them even to her." "Perhaps it is now time to enunciate them, Jatin," Mrs. Shah said. "And I'm not just any stranger. I'm a qualified marriage counselor, the best person for you to talk to. Meena has said she wants to know, however terrible, and we cannot go over, under, or through this roadblock until we have examined it. So, whenever you're ready." She didn't indicate, but she was secretly delighted with his reluctance. Whatever had changed him had obviously not completely eroded his affection and respect for his wife. That was a good sign. His Adam's apple bobbed furiously, and one could see he was building up to speak. When it came, it was like a dam burst, all out in one furious gush, and then spent and silent. "She meets strange men when she thinks I'm safely out of the way." Meena's shocked gasp did not deter him at all. "I've caught her red-handed, so there's no use denying it. I was meeting an old friend she didn't know, and she encouraged me to go out alone with him. I asked her to join us, but she insisted she'd be fine at home. I told her where we were dining, hoping she'd be tempted. But no, she wanted me to enjoy the time with my friend alone, she said. So I left her at home and went. At the last minute, my friend said he wanted to go somewhere less fancy, so we wound up at a popular cafe nearby. There was a couple sitting in the cafe when I walked in. As the light was low, I didn't know who they were until the woman turned around and I saw it was my wife. This same Meena, sitting here, looking at me with innocent eyes. I didn't know the man, an oily, ugly fellow. Thank God my friend had never met my wife, so he couldn't recognize her cheating on me. I chose a table in another corner and sat where I could watch her. They chatted quickly, as if they had only limited time. Several times she checked her watch. Naturally, she had to ensure she got home before I did. He took out an envelope and lay it on the table. And she took out a matching envelope. Love letters. Can you imagine that? Brazenly exchanging love letters in a public place and married to this gullible fool only a few months ago. The letters lay untouched between them, but they talked hurriedly and she checked her watch often. Finally, he opened his letter, cast his eye over it, put it back in the cover, kissed it several times and handed it to her again. She accepted it instantly, now that it was covered with his kisses. I don't know how I held it together with my friend. Luckily, he thought it was because I was missing Meena, joked about that, and chastised me for not bringing her along. And I gave him all kinds of rubbish excuses. How could I tell him that she was conducting a love affair with another man just a few tables away? Now you understand, madam, why I cannot trust her? I have seen her infidelity with my own eyes. Should I not keep track of her every minute of the day? Should I not throw her out of my house? I cannot bear to be married to this treacherous woman. She is a viper in my bosom. He ran himself dry and fell silent, breathing heavily. Meena had listened to all this aghast, then calmed herself down, leaned back in her chair looking at the ceiling, tried fruitlessly to catch Mrs. Shah's eyes, and finally slumped over in despair. She lifted her head at last to see Jatin still looking elsewhere, but the counsellor's eye now firmly back on her. We have heard Jatin now, Meena. Evidently he saw something. A cafe, a strange man, an exchange of letters. What is your explanation of these events? What explanation can she have? These are the facts. Did I not see them, kissing letters and exchanging them with my own eyes? Just her rotten luck that we chose the same restaurant. Otherwise, she would still be carrying on behind my back. Since that day, she hasn't had a chance. But this is no way to live. I don't have a minute's rest. I track her every movement and it's destroying me. Better she goes and we call off this sham of a marriage. Jatin flung out his words. Mrs. Shah let him have his say. And when he stopped, she said softly. So softly, they both had to lean forward to listen. Thank you, Jatin. We must now give Meena a chance to answer. But by now, Meena was in a cold fury. Her lips were compressed and her eyes were hard. I read somewhere, no good deed goes unpunished. And I laughed, thinking it was a joke. Ha! The joke's on me now. She shook her head bitterly. Very soon after we were married, days, I started getting calls from public places, restaurants, offices, bookshops, all landlines. I know this because I installed Truecaller to check the calls. Never from the same place, always the same message. I have information on your husband, and unless you give me a lakh of rupees, I will publish this information and neither of you will be fit to show your face in public. Now it was Jatin's turn to be horrified, but Meena ignored him stonily. I always gave him the same response. There was no information about my husband that he could give me that I didn't already have, so he could publish and be done with it. I didn't have a lakh of rupees, and if I did, I wouldn't give it to him anyway. You see, I trusted Jatin. She let those last words hang in the thick air of the room. From once a week, the calls became once a day, and then several times a day, and it was terribly stressful. I was always worried that a call might come when Jatin was present, and how would I answer this devil then? I was embarrassed to even mention it to Jatin. He might think I doubted him, which I didn't. We were too newly married, you see, and had started discovering things about him I'd not known before. That he had a temper, for instance. So I was unwilling to mention these malicious phone calls to him. But the situation was out of hand. Harrying calls throughout the day. So I found a detective agency online and explained the situation. They asked for a week to get the facts. After a week, they said they needed another few days, but I hadn't paid even a rupee so far, so I held my patience. The calls were still coming, 2, 3, even 4 times a day. Finally, the detective agency called and said they had the full facts. I asked them to deliver a printed document with the results of their investigation. They brought it to my office the next day, and I paid them the full fee. The man who delivered the report wanted me to read it, but I was barely willing to touch it. He explained that this was a common blackmailing tactic. Usually the threats were empty. He just hoped to bully us into some payment. The next time he called, I agreed to meet him. He thought that meant cash and was very excited. Jatin was going to meet the friend he mentioned, so I fixed up to meet this fellow at a nearby cafe at the same time. We both took out our envelopes, as Jatin saw. I forced him to open and read mine, sign an acknowledgement of the contents, and to seal the envelope. That's what he must have been doing, by the way, not kissing it. And then sign again over the flap too. I pocketed it and counter-threatened him with it, and then left, without ever touching the filthy, evil envelope he'd brought. I never even thought of checking what he had on Jatin. I knew my husband well enough not to doubt him. I loved him, and such mistrust was unseemly, I thought. But others don't feel that way, it appears. They are quick to mistrust and quicker to accuse without even bothering to confirm. The sarcasm settled weightily in the room. Mrs. Shah started to speak, but Meena was in no mood to listen. She pushed back her chair, collected her belongings, and walked out of the room without a word or a glance. Jatin was so stunned, he didn't even move. It was a good long time before he spoke. I'll bring her back. She brought me, now I must bring her. It may take some time, but I will. I cannot make this right on my own. I need your help. He stood up, looking ashen and unwilling to meet her eyes. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, needing to reassure himself more than her. I will bring her back. You must help us through this. After they'd both left, Mrs. Shah spoke aloud in the empty room for the recording device to capture her remarks. I think this issue will get resolved. It will take effort and we will have to deal with the mistrust and hurt, but they evidently love each other, so it looks like it might actually work. Tuesday, February 11, 2020, 6:30 p.m.